Joining us today, we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about something that every public safety leader is dealing with right now: how to create clarity in an environment where there's more data, more systems, and more pressure than ever. This session isn't about evaluating new technology. It's really about stepping back and looking at how information is flowing across your department today, and where that may be helping or hurting your ability to make decisions. Whether you're in fire, EMS, or law enforcement, the challenge is the same: different systems, different teams, different environments, all trying to operate from the same picture. Today's really about framing that problem clearly and sharing how agencies are starting to think about it differently. I'm going to jump into some introductions. Today, I'm joined by Bruce. Bruce has worked closely with agencies across the country, helping departments think through how to connect systems, reduce information overload, and create a more consistent operational view across their organization. My name is Stephanie. I lead marketing here at First Arriving. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Bruce. He'll talk about what you're seeing. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. No problem. Go ahead and finish.
Yep. Turn it over to you, Bruce, to walk through what you're seeing and how agencies are approaching this today.
Sure. Thanks very much, Stephanie. All right. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning for those of you that are watching this in various time zones and at various times of the day. Appreciate you joining us for this recorded webinar today. Really, this is an important part of what we do. And as we think about being a leader in public safety today, one of the things that we have to be thinking about is the information and the data that we're all looking to better understand. Now, as we have watched the public safety space evolve, and again, as Stephanie mentioned, we're speaking generally about public safety. This is a police and law enforcement issue. This is a EMS issue, and this is certainly a fire issue. And as we think about the different kinds of agencies, the things that we have found is that over the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of us have started to embrace various platforms. And when we think about platforms, we can think about different ways that we manage information, the way that we're alerted to the emergencies that we respond to in our communities, and a variety of different ways that we're trying to understand how we're delivering service to the communities that we're sworn to protect. As we think about this, I a lot of times think about this as kind of the big five platform environment, right? And the big five being first and foremost your CAD or communications dispatch centers and how you're getting alerted for calls, right? And not only are your dispatchers receiving information, but in today's world, they're using a computer-aided dispatch system in order to be able to send data to you on an MDT, on a mobile device, on a smart device, and a variety of other things. This also triggers, if you're a fire department or an EMS agency, various audible alerts, sometimes lighting in the fire stations and facilities, and some of these kinds of things that go along with it. But then there's four other very important areas that a lot of us lean on today. One of them being a records management system. This is where we're tracking all of our incident data and all of these kinds of things. Online learning and credentialing management is another thing that we're doing. Scheduling also. And then in addition to that, inventory management. What's on the rig? What's in the patrol car? When is a taser cartridge out of date? When are the AED pads out of date? When do we have to send something to the shop because of a brake issue, and so on? Now, as we think about all of these kinds of things, as leaders in public safety today, one of the other things that we're constantly challenged with is the members of our organization keeping up with the data, making sure that they're completing the tasks within these platforms that they need to. And so as we think about those kinds of things, one of the things that almost anybody in supervision within the public safety space today will hear from its members is that when they haven't done something within a platform, they haven't completed a report is overdue, they didn't keep their credentials up to date, and now their driver's license has expired, or their EMT or paramedic license is 3 days from expiring, but yet they haven't done any of their CEUs yet. And there's a multitude of different examples of this. The one thing that we hear, the number one excuse that we hear from our members is, well, geez, I didn't know. And as much as that may infuriate us and frustrate us, there's some degree of that that is actually true. And what we have to remember is that as we add more systems, as we add more platforms, what we're doing is we're bifurcating all of this data into silos. And this is what's breaking down the public safety system overall. As we think about all these different things, the more systems we add, the more alerts, the more pressure, the more data, the different ways that we communicate via email and text message and instant messaging, and then messaging within various platforms and alerts and tasks and all of these different things, before too long, our people just simply no longer know where to go and get the information that they need. So, the thing to keep in mind here is that the gap that many of us are trying to solve for is not a lack of information. In fact, it's not even an access problem to that information, but it's where am I getting this information? Do I have all of it? And do I have a single source of truth where I can go to at any given time? And in many cases, a passive way that I can look at a screen as an example. And as long as my name isn't up in lights, highlighted in red, I'm good. And I can have the peace of mind of being able to focus on other aspects of my job throughout the day, throughout the shift, throughout the year, and not have to worry about other things. So when we think about that as an idea, what we also have to remember is that as we think about the future, we're not going to see less data. What we're going to see is we're going to continue to see more information, more emphasis on not only data in general, but good, accurate, aggregated data that starts telling a story about how are we doing, what does service delivery look like, and so on. But when we see this information create all of this noise, it really detracts from what's really important. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is that as we are leaders in the organization, and as we try to move our organizations forward, the one thing that I want to ask you is think about your agency's ability to communicate effectively today. And when I think about the idea of communication and communication effectiveness, what I'm talking about is two very important aspects. The first one is this data that we've been talking about, right? What are they hearing? What are they getting? What do they know? What does that information say? And what story does that tell? But really, when you think about it, that's only half the picture. Because the other thing that we in public safety do is we are constantly communicating. Now, the way that we communicate a lot of times changes. And also, it's not always consistent. Sometimes we may send an instant message. We may use Teams if you're a Microsoft agency, or we may use Google Chat, or we may use a variety of different instant messaging platforms. We may use instant messaging within a given platform. We may use notifications. We may do a lot of different things. But how consistent is that? And how effective is it? Because the other thing that happens an awful lot is we all get information fatigue, and we're constantly getting badgered about this and this reminder, and don't forget about that. When the reality is, all I need to know is what I need to know. And how do I do that? For example, if it's not important, maybe I should just send it in an email. And then the next time somebody comes to work and opens their email server, that's good enough. So these are the kinds of things that we have to be thinking about today. And my question to you is, how would you rate your agency on the ability to do that well? Give it a letter grade if you want to, A through D. And if you need to, consider F, as a failing grade. But not only think about it from your perspective, but also think about it from the perspective if I were to go to a member of your organization and say, hey, how does your agency communicate today, and how effective are they to giving you the information that you need? What would I be told as someone who is an outsider to your organization? Unfortunately, what most of us know is that that report card is probably not going to give us the letter grade that we're going to be proud of. And so the next question then becomes, how do we start working on improving that? So when we think about what that overload looks like, we want to unpack that a little bit farther. When we as leaders are leading a public safety agency forward, the expectations that we have as leaders are usually pretty standard. We want a clear operational picture. We want real-time awareness, and we want consistent communication from the top down and from the bottom up in two-way communication, so that way we all have an effective conduit of information that goes in both directions. Now, unfortunately, what we know though is exactly what I was talking about a moment ago, and that is that the information that we're trying to share and that we need to know is scattered across a lot of different organizations. We know that in a lot of cases, these updates that we're trying to send to our people are going to be buried. A lot of times there's a lot of opportunity to interpret what that information is saying, and we may get that interpretation wrong. There are also maybe the platform fatigue that I mentioned earlier, where people just don't know where to go. And so they just simply choose not to go anywhere. And they're like, well, if it's something I need to know, they'll tell me. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave it alone and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. So the other thing we also have to think about is what is the hidden cost of all of this investment in technology that a lot of us are making already today? We spend a good bit of money in these various platforms. And when we think about when it comes budget time and we start thinking about the renewal on the subscriptions for these platforms that we're operating with today, one of the big things is return on investment. How often are you interacting with that platform? Are you utilizing everything that that platform can do? And the reality is, underutilization is one of the greatest risks to losing funding for a platform because it's simply not being used to its full potential, or maybe not even at all. So, what this results in is slower and poor decision making across the organization. That, hey, chief, I just didn't know kind of thing. And again, remember, that can be fictional, but it can also be factual based on what's going on. Inconsistent in, execution. And in a lot of cases, one of the primary risks with these platforms is we didn't get them started in the right foot to begin with. And then as a result, there's a reduction in situational awareness across teams from an informational standpoint, right? We're not talking about the situational awareness at a structure fire or those kinds of things. We're talking about situational awareness on what's going on in the organization right now. Are we receiving a $1.2 million fire truck, which is something that really should be celebrated? Does anybody even know that it's coming? Is that something that the organization is excited about, and so on? So there's a lot of various nuances to this that we have to be thinking about as we go along. As we think about this as well, with complexity is where we start to see systematic failures across the organization. So this starts where now, as we add another system, people are like, you've got to be kidding me. Now I've got to have another email. I got to have another password, even with single sign on, right? Sometimes single sign on doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And then when am I getting alerts? Am I getting alerts all the time? Is this an app that I have to put on my own personal device? And, we hear a lot about liability and litigation related to that. Another alert to track, another place to check. The reality is that now our attention is fragmented across multiple platforms. And what we all know, whether we're willing to acknowledge it or not, is that frankly, a lot of our people are like, I'm just not gonna. And while we don't like willful negligence and we don't like, willful non-compliance, that becomes an issue. And if it's not corrected, now this becomes the new organizational culture and the new organizational norm, which is a problem all on its own. So what we have to be thinking about is, are we creating silos within our organization, and are we providing an overall situational awareness, or are we actually making it harder to know what's going on because of all of these various platforms that we have out there that are possibly making it harder for us to do these things? So when we think about information situational awareness, That clarity is the key to organizational success, right? So we have to remember that part of this is perception by our members. And as we think about that perception, what we have to remember is it's not necessarily what's actually going on as much as what I think is going on. But again, data, reports, citizen input, environmental clues are all things that we need to be thinking about from a perception standpoint, and then being able to start processing and decoding that information into a deal of or a situation of understanding. Basically, what does this mean, right? Are we looking at patterns? Are we looking at context and history? Are we looking at risk assessments and resource mapping? All of these different things to help us anticipate what's coming next. As we all know, that the more that we can anticipate problems lying in wait and be able to do things in anticipation of those, the two positives of that is that it's going to reduce frequency and also severity in many different cases. So it may sound like I'm using a risk management kind of philosophy and applying that to information. And frankly, that's exactly what I'm doing. What we have to remember, though, prioritization over volume is not really the idea here as much as it is we want to make sure that all of this information is being used to be able to evaluate what's going on and then starting to make decisions and take actions that are timely and proportionate based upon what's going on. By having a better response system and being able to respond to emergencies and non-emergency situations and all of the like, what this gives us the ability to do is it gives us the ability to increase our community's trust and make sure that it's providing a strong foundation for our communities today and also into the future. So, what high performing agencies do differently is that they have a framework that allows us to be able to have a general situational awareness of what's going on in the organization, driven by data and the information that we're sharing about the various nuanced events that are going on across the organization. But what this means is that now we're starting to think about aggregating data into a single view where we're taking all of the different bits of information coming from the various platforms and putting it into a single view. And we also want to make sure that we're filtering this so that way the most important actionable information is what's at the prominence of this single access point that can be shared across the organization, both within a station or facility, as well as being able to access it where a lot of our younger members coming into public safety today get all of their information. Where is that? Well, it's on that device that they carry in their pocket and have in their hand all day, every day. What we have to remember is that an OG like me that's been in this business since 1984, I would much rather have a hard copy book, or I would much rather be able to look at something on a computer or a screen. Now, my 25-year-old son, who's been in this business for 10 years already, is 1000% the exact converse of me. And if I don't put information in front of him in that mobile device, he probably won't pay any attention to it because it's not in the media that makes sense to him. So, as leaders, we also have to think about how are we making sure that we're displaying that information where it means the most to our audience. And right now, we have a lot of different age groups that represent our workforce today, and we've got to make sure we meet them where they are. So as we think about that clarity framework, now what we're thinking about is, okay, let's first of all think about the various systems that we have in place, right? We talked about CAD, we talked about staffing and alerts and operational data and credential management, training, inventory management, RMS, and more, right? This is a lot of information. And truthfully, not all of it is relevant on a day-to-day basis. But there is actionable data that is consistently available in these systems that need to be called out. So the idea here is that we're not in business of trying to figure out how to replace these systems unless they're ineffective for our organizational experience. More, what we're trying to do is we're trying to glean the most important information, the actionable information, and extending that into a single conduit to where it's placed in a place of prominence for our members to access at any given time. So the idea here is now we're gaining a single operational picture. So we're connecting systems, not replacing them. Why does that matter? Because now we're getting a higher return on the investment of the dollars that we're already spending on the systems that we have in place, but we're expressing the data that's coming out of these platforms in a new and meaningful way. So we also have to remember that not all information deserves attention. There's a lot of information. If we use the analogy of if it can go in an email, then you know what? Send it in an email certainly applies here. And I think in some cases, with those of us that are in public safety, everything is important. Everything's a fire drill. Everything's an active shooter situation. Everything is a mass casualty event, right? When the reality is probably not. And so we also need to be thinking about our communication scheme. What's important, what's needing to be communicated right now can be delayed or can just be a part of a normal communication scheme. And so that what's important filter is a very, very important part of it and should be shared across the organization. Because what we also know is that we have some people within our organizations that when somebody sends an email, you have the individuals who will reply all every single time in an email. Now, we can all acknowledge that reply all is not appropriate 99% of the time. Maybe 1% of the time it is. But this is a good example, though, of how should you communicate? Where should it be communicated? What platform do we use? Is an acknowledgement of that information necessary? And what does that mean when they acknowledge that you've sent them a message? Because the fallacy with a policy or a message acknowledgement is that they also consumed the information, they decoded it, they understood it, and then they acted on it. Now, the reality that we know here is that that's usually not the case. An acknowledgement of messaging means one single thing and one thing only, and that is that that message was delivered. So we have to make sure that we're also thinking from a prioritization standpoint. If there's feedback necessary, needs to be more than just an acknowledgement. There needs to be action items that are clearly communicated to go along with that. And so then we need to have a communications plan, just like we think about with all of the FEMA forms that we do and all of those kinds of things, right? Where we need to make sure that everybody understands how we communicate within the organization and what should be going on when and where. So again, when we think about this, what we also have to think about is how do we communicate effectively across organizations? If you're sitting on this and watching this video today and you're thinking about it from the perspective of law enforcement, depending upon the size of your organization, small municipal police department in a small town where you just have a single station, maybe an office or two, communication across the organization is relatively straightforward. However, you start getting into large municipal police departments, sheriff's offices, highway patrol organizations within law enforcement space, as an example, right? This is now where trying to communicate across an entire county, across an entire state becomes very, very problematic. If you're thinking about the fire service, right? Career combination, volunteer, all of these things matter because you will have some organizations that you may not have members that come to the fire station for a week or two, but there's things going on that they need to know. EMS, where are you sending your crews? Do they actually have a facility to hang out in? Are they sitting in the parking lot of a convenience store or other location? All of these challenges need to be solved by making sure there's a single conduit that has multiple different access points so people can get that information. As you think about command staff, now we have different ways that we need to be looking at this. I might be needing information from an oversight perspective or coordination or decision making. And when we're also thinking about this, we are all not spending time in the field 24/7, 365. Sometimes we're in a facility. Sometimes we are mobile. Sometimes we're on foot. Sometimes we're deployed on a major event, especially if you're in the fire service deploying for wildfires or natural disasters or any of those kinds of things, right? The bottom line is what we have to be able to do today is we have to be able to make sure that even when our personnel are not in our back pocket, and they've been deployed or some of those kinds of things. If there's other important information going on, they need to be able to maintain that awareness of what's going on, regardless of where they are. So there's no versionary mismatch, no blurred lines or anything like that that could start to cloud what our information view is and our ability to understand what's going on. But the other thing is, many of us have been starting to figure this communication scheme out for a while. Some of us have been doing PowerPoint and starting to use other systems that have been around for the last several years in which to be able to start sharing information. The only problem is most of that information is static based upon a spreadsheet or a Power BI report or some of those kinds of things that requires manual updates at various times when there's new information available. But wouldn't it be great if most of your data flow could be automated? So that way, with new information, who's behind on a credential report? Who's behind on getting their incident reports done or their EPCRs done from a patient care call? Wouldn't that be just a great way to be able to take that time from away behind the desk and get you back out amongst your people and the community to have more time to actually do what's meaningful and what matters? So the idea here is that we also want to look at our systems and our communication schemes and our platforms and try to remove dependency on individuals and timelines and reminders on a calendar that says, hey, you don't forget, you got to update this slide or that slide or something like that. Anytime we can reduce that manual workload, it's going to not only improve consistency, but it's also going to improve relevancy of that information as we think about how we're communicating today and into the future. So, what we're really wanting to be able to do is, as a public safety industry and the data that we're all trying to manage today, we're wanting to start moving away from a disconnected environment where there's manual updates, limited visibility, and where nothing is talking to each other over a day to day, week to week, and month to month scheme. What we're wanting to start moving towards is a single access point that can be accessed multiple different ways from a computer in a workstation, from a screen at various locations within a facility, mobile data, and personal communication data. So that way we're getting that information no matter where we access it from, it all looks the same. And also, as things are changing, when we're starting to see, hey, we've got several people that were behind on their reports, but they've complied with what we've asked them to do, and they're all caught up. And for the first time in 4 months, we don't have any behind or anybody who's behind on a report is something that should be celebrated because now we can start changing organizational culture and making sure that we're emphasizing what's right and trying to encourage our people to continue that compliance in the future. By doing that, that's also providing some real time clarity. You know, it's one of those things that if you talk to somebody and you're like, hey, did you have a pretty busy shift? And usually you hear only one of two responses. Oh, yeah, man, we were absolutely slammed. We got crushed the entire time. And then you actually look in the data and they ran 2 calls. Or you have other people that you're like, hey, do you have a busy shift? You know, it really wasn't that bad. And they ran 14, right? So the idea is clarity of that data where we're taking perspective out and we're looking at data for what it really is and letting the data have that big operational impact and helping us to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what right actually looks like. So from there, What we also want to do is we want to make sure that the reality of today is that we want various aspects of our organization, depending upon what role you play in the organization, to be able to really see what's going on. For example, if you're in a command role, you're able to see not only what is going on, but are you able to respond in a real time readiness posture to what's going on in your community right now? Do you have the ability to take the next motor vehicle accident, multi alarm person strat call, structure fire, or whatever might be going on that could really stretch your resources into the future? What we also want is we want your crews to know what's going on. For example, I can tell you in my role in the fire service, there were many times that I would hear a neighboring company get hit out for a call, and you know darn good and well that if another call comes in the next 10 minutes, you're it. So it's one of those things. You're going to start moving towards the truck. Maybe you're going to start putting your gear on. Maybe you're going to go ahead and open the door and some of those kinds of things. So that way we can actually improve that service delivery to Mr. and Mrs. Smith because we're anticipating what's coming next. The other thing is we want to know exactly what's going on. We want to make sure that alerts are visible immediately. We can also see turn by turn instructions. We know what's going on with the weather and a variety of different things. And then when we have training and compliance issues that are going on, we're able to start identifying those with a sufficient amount of lead time in which to be able to get caught up if we're behind on continuing education and all that credential management, and make sure that we're able to get those renewals done without a delay so that we don't have to worry about credentialing going forward. So, as we think about all of these different things, what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and so on, the idea here is that we really want to focus on what happens and where is the benefit when we start getting good at these ideas, right? The idea here is that the outcome that we desire and that we're looking for is that we want informational and operational clarity. So now, when we need to make a decision, instead of having to go, well, let me look at this report, let me think about this, what's going on with the weather, what's traffic looking like, and all that kind of stuff, I have a general idea what's going on at any given time based upon information that I'm getting from multiple platforms that's being delivered in real time, it's being updated. And from there, I can make a better decision. Right. And in addition to that, we're able to do it more often because now we're able to consistently execute a response plan based upon what's going on, is one example. But also, if we know that we've got a significant weather event going on in the next couple of days, this is empowering your members to be able to get their family members ready for them potentially being not able to come home for a couple of days or on a very limited basis. Making sure that their families are going to be taken care of is going to ensure that your members are going to be able to respond better because they'll have the peace of mind of knowing that their family members are going to be okay. But the other thing is, we don't want just a few of our members paying attention to the information that's available to them. We want every member of our organization to feel empowered that they have all of the wealth of information just as a brand new firefighter or police officer or EMT paramedic on the road that the chief or the director of the organization also has, right? That makes sure that everybody has a high level of engagement. And that analogy of everybody's not only in the boat, not only is everybody grabbed an oar, but we all know where we're headed. It's a big difference between if you're going to the Bering Strait in a canoe versus if you're going to Tahiti in a canoe, if you're in shorts and a t-shirt kind of idea. But the other thing is too, when we can make less work and we can work more efficiently, everything is going to improve because now the information that we have is at the ready and it's updated and it's accurate. So now we have confidence in what's going on and can start making those decisions better as we are looking for improved operational consistency across the organization. So, what we have to think about is that clarity within the public safety space starts with leaders. As a chief, as a assistant chief, as a captain, as a lieutenant, as a director, as an operations manager, whatever your title is, as a leader, this means that you need to make sure that you're defining what matters. And it is true that across the public safety space, sometimes we have a tendency to get wrapped around the axles on non consequential items, right? And we can have a bad attitude. But we, the leadership of public safety, are the ones that set the bar as far as defining what matters, right? When we are empowered with good, actionable, accurate data, this also has a tendency to stop or at least reduce misinformation, misunderstandings, misalignment with what's going on, and those kinds of things. A standardized delivery platform means that now, if I've got a question about what's going on, I will have access to the information I need so that I feel confident that I understand what's going on. Okay. And this makes sure that also, if I'm talking to my fellow firefighter on another shift, if I'm talking to the day shift coming off of midnights or whatever is going on, we have consistent information across those shifts and across those roles and across those environments. But this also means that when we start bringing this information into a standardized platform, now we can even start doing something really cool, which is now we can start thinking about from a community level of making sure that the police department, the fire department, local government, and other stakeholders within the community all can have access to the same basic information about what's going on in your community at any given time. I have several good friends that are city managers and mayors and city leaders. And one of the things that we can all acknowledge in many communities, when you have a significant emergency event, whether that is severe weather like we're seeing this time of year in the spring with tornadoes and hail and those kinds of things, whether it's wildfire season, it's common on the West Coast, whether this is hurricane season, common in the East Coast, whether this is severe winter weather and blizzards that we commonly see in the upper Midwest, we all have significant events that can affect whole communities. And it's important that public safety is able to interact with our other community partners as well. And so when we think about clarity and we think about leadership, it's not just the police chief and the fire chief. It's truly a community issue. And we can also start thinking about how can we aggregate data and situational information across our different stakeholders within the community so we all have that same operational picture at the same time. So, as we wrap up our time together today, there's a couple of things that I want to leave with you as you start thinking about not only does this make sense to you, but I want you to start thinking about that report card that I kind of started off our conversation with today. And that report card are some very important questions that I'm going to encourage you to ask yourself. For one, when you think about information across your organization, what is mission critical versus what is routine communications, as an example? What do you need to make sure everybody knows versus what's information that everybody needs to know right now? And the other thing I want you to be thinking about is, where does your information live today? Is it available to everybody through a single access point? Or do I have multiple platforms that I have to log into, from a records management and a learning management and a scheduling and a inventory management kind of scheme, in order to be able to get everything that I need to know just from an information and data standpoint? And then another thing I want you to be thinking about, who has access to that information? Does everybody from your newest firefighter, police officer, EMT, paramedic, all the way up through the organizational leader role have the ability to see the information that they need? Or are there barriers to that that maybe we need to consider removing? And in addition to that, is that information available to be automatically updated? Or is this something that somebody has to be tasked with to manually update on a weekly, monthly, or even daily basis in some cases, if we think about scheduling for many organizations? And what is the risk if that information is incorrect or isn't updated. So another thing that we want to think about is that this time of year, as we think about the spring, is also when we are in trade show season. And many of us look forward to going to events like the Fire Department Instructors Conference is one example that just wrapped up for the fire service and EMS partners this last week in Indianapolis as an example. But many of us are going to be traveling to state shows and regional shows and other national shows over the coming months. So, one of the things that we're all going to be doing is that we're going to spend some time walking the floors of the expositions. What are we going to be seeing? What new platforms are out there? And some of those kinds of things. As you're thinking about new platforms, some of the things that I'd encourage you to be thinking about is how is it going to benefit your organization as you consider that platform? Is it going to aid in reducing complexity, or is it potentially going to add complexity to it? What's it going to do for the visibility of the data across your organization? Are we adding another platform and another conduit that now we're going to have a new set of credentials in order to be able to access? How automated is it? How much manual work are you going to have to do? And how does it contribute to the overall situational awareness and your ability to understand what's going on within your organization? What we know across all of these various things is that we need to start thinking about, just like if you have a cold, what are you going to do about that cold? Are you going to just suffer through it and not do anything? Are you going to take an over the counter medication to be able to get it fixed? Are you going to go to the doctor? What are you going to do? But one of the things is we start thinking about problems, we got to make sure that we start figuring out the right remedy. And unfortunately, what we know is that it could be the common cold, it could be allergies, but it could also be a sinus infection that actually requires a prescription and a doctor to intervene. The main thing is make sure that you take the time to fully understand the problem first. Because if we don't fully understand what's going on and we keep adding new systems, or if we don't really understand the problem, any fix that we try to apply, we might actually apply the wrong fix, which could actually become more of a challenge for us downstream and can make the problem worse instead of actually better. So, as we wrap up our time today, the thing that I want to challenge all of you that watch this video is to remember there is more data, more platforms, and more information that's coming. There is a lot of buzz going along in everything that we touch today about artificial intelligence. And we all can acknowledge that artificial intelligence is going to play a part in our data and our organizations into the future. Right, wrong, or indifferent, this is something that we're going to have to embrace. But I do believe that artificial intelligence is going to be a positive role in our organizations going forward, even though there is the risk of having AI get it wrong, misinterpret information, and have those artifacts that we hear so much about, regardless of your AI platform of choice. But what we also have to acknowledge is that this is not going to go away. So what we have to do is we have to really start digging in before data becomes even more of an issue and more of a tool for us in the future, and make sure that we're bringing clarity to the information in the future that we're all going to be relying on, and making sure that as we think about all of the different platforms that we have, all of the different integrations that we're going to have from a variety of different places, and we're going to hear more and more and more about organizations and companies that are going to talk about AI that they have within their organizations and all that kind of stuff. We have to remember that many times when you talk to companies, what you're hearing is they're going to be able to do this within the information and the platforms that they own. One of the things that we also have to be thinking about is how can we, as a public safety agency, start relying on being able to bring in all of the various platforms into a single access point. And what does that look like? The good news is that's why First Arriving is here. One of the things that First Arriving prides ourselves in is that we do not house or aggregate your data from the various platforms that you may have in place today. We kind of consider ourselves the Switzerland of the SaaS space and of these various platforms. And what that simply means is that with you have various platforms that are currently being engaged today, now what we can do is that we can start bringing that data into a single access point through our information platform and make all of the data that we've been talking about today visible in both displays within your stations as well within a mobile platform that can be accessed when you're not in a facility. Want to find out more about how to do that? One of the things that we would love to be able to do is we would love to be able to have an opportunity to be able to sit down with you and schedule some time to just learn more about your organization, your information, and how we can actually help you. So one of the easiest ways for us to be able to do that is for us to be able to just hear from you as we wrap up our time today. And the best way for us to hear from you is to simply use the information that we have here on the screen. You can either reach out to us at firstarriving.com/contact, or you can send us an email at getstartedwithfirstarriving.com. Either way, what we will do when you reach out to us, we'll schedule a time to talk to you. We'll discover how we can help you, and we'll be able to show you how First Arriving in our information platform will be able to bring this information that we've talked about today into that single view that we've talked about and why that would be important for your organization. So as we wrap up, I hope that this information has been informative for you. I hope that it's gotten you thinking a little bit about ways that you can help your organization be better in the future. So thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us today. Stay safe.